Have you ever been told that you've changed the way that someone thinks about something? Or has anyone ever made you change the way you think of something? It's a powerful feeling. The connections that we can make through podcasting have that power. And sometimes it's not even obvious. You may not be even aware that you've had that effect on somebody through your podcast. Podcasters choose to start podcasts for all sorts of reasons. And one of those is to connect with like-minded people in their space, or even not so like-minded people. I'm your host, Joe Eftihiou, and today I'm thrilled to have Adrian Ramsay, the brilliant mind behind Talk Design, on the show. In this episode, we cover how podcasting can transform lives of the podcast themselves and the audience, how Adrian has kept content fresh and consistent over 160 odd episodes, why we should take the time to reflect on the impacts that we have as podcasters, the story of when Adrian was recognised at an event by a fan of his podcast, podcasting monetization methods, podcasting tech, Zoom versus the dedicated platforms, and so much more. So sit back and relax and enjoy my conversation with Adrian. I'm sure you'll be inspired by the endless possibilities of podcasting that we discuss. Adrian, thank you for joining me on Podcasting Amplified. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good, Joe. Thank you so much for having me on.
No worries.
I'm really looking forward to another chat. Yeah.
Brilliant. So Adrian is an award-winning designer, and his podcast, Talk Design, focuses on the expansive world of design, architecture, and more. Taking that from your description, that's from your words. So the podcast has been going for about 3 years now, I believe.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. And you sit down with some of the big names and those who are lesser known from across the international design world to find out what makes them tick, what they strive for, and what unites us in the universal quest to create something simple, functional, and beautiful.
Did I write that?
Yeah. Does that still apply today?
It does. It really does. And I think that one of the things with that is that the more people that you speak to at different levels, whether they're big or small in this, in the creativity space, you really start to learn the nuances and also the commonality, and then the nuances that stand people apart. It's a fascinating journey, no doubt.
Yeah, because you do have quite a wide variety of guests on, I've noticed. Like, I was listening to your episode, you were speaking to a podcast producer. Obviously, you speak to other designers and architects as well.
Yep.
Do you find that it's a challenge to keep things varied, or does that make it easier that you can sort of pick from different fields?
I think that, I've got the option of always picking from different fields. I go through stages of, being in my own life, of being like really focused on maybe say architecture, or really focused on interior design, because those are things that I supply to the marketplace in my own business. And then I will go, I'm around a lot of say business coaches and people like that, and I'll go, you know what? Yes, I want to say I've had enough of the creative in that space. What about the creativity in the other space? Or I will spot something like, there's a guy on my podcast called Cult Wrangler, and he makes custom motorcycles. So strips them back. Guys are super creative. He also bull rides, bronc rides, and plays drums in a band. So this guy is like cutting edge creativity, but he's applying it to making motorcycles to make a living. And then the fun things he does, which I don't know whether they're fun if you had to do it or I had to do it, is get on the back of a bronco or a bull and ride it. You get something from each person and how they hone their creativity. I think that's the part. And so I love to be able to vary it a bit and just throw in an outlier like Colt, and that changes the sort of perspective of the thinking. It's sort of like you're still talking to a high creative, but then this line kind of appears. It's like when I podcasted with you, you're very structured creative, but highly, highly creative. Like, but on a really structured level of how you put things together. And that's why it works so well. Whereas you take somebody like me who has a lot of structure in my business, but mentally I'm not hugely structured. So I get to gain from what you teach me with structure, and then I might go to somebody else who's highly creative again, and we're off with the, flying in the sky with the fairies. So everything kind of adds a dimension to it. And at different times, I feel like I need that dimension.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, when you get to know your ideal listener and your audience, it's about, what they're going to take from it as well. And I'm sure there's plenty of other insights and other approaches to creativity where they, like you say, you took different approaches. You took value from different approaches, different types of creative, and I'm sure your listeners will as well.
I think so. And the other thing is that suddenly you're able to make parallels into other worlds. So you think of your listener, like in my case, I have a lot of people who are interested in architecture and in interior design, mainly because that's what I interview a lot of. And I have a lot of commonality in that part. And I interview a few clothing designers. So if you think that, like, my market, when I say my market, it's not my market, my listener group has a large number of men and women in it. For the woman, I'll talk about, the interior design is probably a stronger pull than, say, the architectural design. And then also when I throw in, an episode, I've got one there with Christina LaMonaco, which is around clothing. Like, she created a line in New York City called Classic Six. And with that, it just takes you to another thing. Now, if you're a woman who's like, I don't know, maybe in your 30s or something, and you love what we're talking about in the way, it's opening up your mind with interior design, and suddenly you hear the parallels of what you would do in clothing design, and I'm making the links as I'm doing it for the listener. And so they might be sidetracked slightly, and it might not be their usual, but they go, oh, okay. This is they can see how design is all encompassing. It takes them on a bit of a journey. They're going to go shopping. They're going to buy slacks, pants, skirts, whatever. And if they get a little hit out of that while they're out there looking for things for an interior, say, styling of a home, it just adds to their knowledge and their comfort and their ability to go and feel confident in a space.
Yeah, and it, they're getting something out of it. They're getting new ideas from it.
Yeah.
And it must keep it interesting for you as well, because you're 3 years in, you've got, was it about 160 episodes, I think?
Yeah, I think, look, if you knew how many we really had, we've probably got about 180.
Oh, unreleased.
But we've got 160. Yeah, we've got quite a few unreleased episodes.
Okay.
And that means I can take a little break over Christmas and stuff.
Yeah. No, it was good. Good to have a backlog.
So I kind of, and there's some that are kind of in depth about design, whereas the others might be really light about design. And then we have things like, we've just done a series for the American Institute of Architecture, Austin, for their homes tour. And those are like 25, 30-minute podcasts where we're talking specifically about a project, and that project in not this weekend, but next weekend, if you're in Austin, Texas, you'll be able to go and walk through those houses, and you're getting a view of it in your ears, in my case, from the architect, and what was the client brief, and what are the little hidden things, where to stop and pause, where to look around. If you're there in the morning, the light will fall this way. If you're there in the afternoon, it will fall this way. These are the magical spots that you might just walk past, but if you've heard the podcast, you'll know to pause and go, oh, I see what they did there. That's clever. Or I'd like that in my home, or whatever it is. So those series I like doing. And because of that, I think we dropped 7 of them in like 2 weeks or something. So, that kind of bulks it up a bit as well. But it's because it's got an end date that we have to get to, where some of the others might be 3 months old. We don't have an end date to get to.
No, so you can have those loaded up, ready to go for, say,
and
Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. And the other ones, when we do a series, is for a very specific audience. So it's the public and other architects who will go and nosy in on homes that other architects have done. And so it's a very specific audience. And if you're not going to be in Austin, Texas, they are somewhat interesting, but maybe not as interesting as just a big overview of how somebody started and what they did and why they do it and what lights their fire and what they've negotiated through doing it, working in an industry.
But then the specific audience, catering to a specific audience, is normally a good thing anyway, rather than
I think so.
more general.
We'll see. Like, it's the 3rd time I've done it for them, and I'm just about to expand it to maybe about 6 different cities in the US. Certainly 3 that are in line for doing it already. So next year I'll expand it out to ideally about 6 cities. The only issue is that most of them do it in October. And so by the time they've got all their ducks in a row, I'll be podcasting every day to get them through over the sort of August, September months to get through that number of people. And as you know, it's one thing to talk to people. It's another thing to run the organizational structure of booking them, getting them there on time and making it happen. That's a whole nother game.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much to it. Do you find yourself flagging ever? Like, you seem very consistent with your releases, but like, it is a lot of work around the rest of your business. Have you ever felt yourself think, oh, I need to take a break from this or anything?
A couple of times where I've just felt overwhelmed. And I think the thing that when it's happened is, maybe I've recorded 5 podcasts in the week, and I honestly can't remember the discussion with the one at the first one of the week or the second one of the week by the time I'm on the 5th one. And I go, that defeats the purpose of what I was trying to do for myself by starting a podcast. Every conversation is, if I had no listeners, if nobody ever showed up to listen to it, I was still always going to get something from my discussion. And when it gets that intense and you're sort of that overwhelmed, I'm still in the moment in the podcast, but it's like a blank when I go back. People say to me, oh, you interviewed so-and-so, or worse still, the person who I interviewed talks to me and they tell me something I said, and I'm like, really, did I? I don't say that, but I think it. I go, wow, where's that gone? It was so meaningful to them, but I can't even remember it.
Yeah.
So then I try and take a week or 2 off, and
I was just going to say, how have you dealt with that and pushed through it? But just taking a break.
Yeah, take a couple of weeks off and just sort of go back and listen to a couple of episodes. Or also, when you're super busy like that, I'm not listening to anybody else's podcast.
Yeah.
And I find that there's a freshness in listening to other people's podcasts, whether it's around the same subject as that I do, which I do a bit of. But generally, I try and listen to something that is taking me in a completely different mindset, because their audience could be my audience, and how am I relating to it? Like, how am I getting there?
Yeah, so, you can get a lot from it, and things change so fast in podcasting that you can find that you've actually your sort of structure or things have actually gotten a bit stale, and you listen to something a bit more fresh, and it gives you ideas.
I agreed totally. And like, as you say, about 160 episodes, I think, released. And I'm going, okay, I need to freshen up the start, freshen up the end. I need to do a lot more thankful, be a lot more grateful for what I've created, in the sense of thanking the listeners and, asking them if they were happy to subscribe, asking them if they're happy to write in. I realized that at the start I was so focused on getting through. And when I say getting through, having a discussion with somebody and getting through that. And now I go, that's going to happen. I don't have to overthink that part. Where's the gratitude for the people who keep turning on this podcast and listening to it? They write to me and they say, wow, I got so much out of this, or I learned so much from that. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and all the rest. But it's not simple to get your audience to engage outside of listening, because they're there to listen. So I found that's a bit of a challenge, like getting them to not to write in and say thanks so much, but to write in and tell me what they would love to know about, or what was something that somebody said that they'd love me to get expansive on, or can I ask the guest that? That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, I feel like with podcasting, it can be difficult to have that connection with your audience unless you do a lot of work outside of the podcast. Like with a platform like YouTube, for example, at least you have the comment section. So you've got a discussion going on throughout, potentially. I mean, you can put them as live episodes, and you can literally see people chatting about the episode as it plays,
right,
as like a live feed.
Right.
But because like one of the beauties of podcasting is that it isn't restricted to one platform, but at the same time, it's kind of a double-edged sword where you don't have this universal community, this space where people can talk about it. Like you go on Spotify, there's no way to leave a comment or something. You might have a couple of reviews or ratings on Spotify. Then on iTunes, you've got a completely different set of reviews. So yeah, unless you're building like an email list community, or Facebook group or something like that around it, then it does make it difficult, and you want that feedback, and it helps that somebody's listening. And
I often kind of as I say, I'm always amazed that somebody does listen. And I was recently at a function, and it was an architectural function. It was in Brisbane City. And I was sitting talking to a guy afterwards, and there was another guy that was kind of hanging around behind my shoulder. And I was waiting to talk to the guy who had been the speaker of the night. And next thing, this guy goes, the guy behind me comes around the front and he goes, I got it. I know who you are. And I said, do I know who you are? And he goes, I don't know, like this. And I said, well, did we go to school together? Because I don't think so. You look younger than me. I was having a bit of a joke with him. And, I said, were you ever in prison? Like this. Anyway, I'm playing around with him, and he goes, I listened to your podcast. I recognized your voice. And he's going, I've been trying to place who you are. And, like you said about this building community thing, I have this thing, like I said to you just before we started, I can't believe that people would want to watch you and I have a chat, because surely their life's got better things in it than you and I sitting and talking. And that's kind of really demeaning in a way. And one of the things that I've realized is that people actually enjoy the human connection of us chatting, and they get something from that human connection that we have. And, when you say I'll put it on YouTube, or, if you stream it on Instagram Live, or whatever it is you do, or all the things maybe that you do, maybe you do all those things. It's very arrogant to go, oh, well, they'll come and listen to me where I tell them to. Why don't you meet them where they're at? You're the one giving it out there, so go and meet them where they're at. Go and take them to where, it's like, I like to use this analogy of the electric car. So the electric car, if there was only charging stations, like there is only fuel stations where you can fill your car up, if you had to go to one of them to charge it every time, you'd be like, oh, this is a drag. But the fact is you can plug it in at home.
Yeah.
That fueling system, that all cars need fuel, that fueling system of making it at your convenience when you're at home or at work and you can plug it in, that's meeting the client where they're at. That's meeting the customer in their own space. And that's a hidden change that people don't kind of realize has happened. But when you can do that, when you make that point of entry easier for someone, so if they want to watch on YouTube and you give them subtitles, let them watch on YouTube and give them subtitles. Why be so arrogant as to say, well, you'll find me on Apple. Don't you worry about that. You'll find me on Apple. You dig around enough. It'll be worth it for you. Yeah, that's crap.
Well, yeah, speaking about the benefits of having this open podcasting where it can be anywhere, this is the problem with these shows that are being, sold to Spotify and they're no longer available anywhere else. But yeah,
that's a really interesting thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like I listened to a great series between Bruce Springsteen and Barack Obama.
Yes.
And absolutely fantastic, to the point where I've got the book of that podcasting series. It's a whole big coffee table book.
Yeah.
Loved the conversations, really insightful. But yeah, you can get in one place. That's your lot. And obviously there's some sort of sponsorship or whatever that they've been paid to do that. And I'm not saying that's wrong, just going, yeah, it's not an open platform at that point, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I agree. Like, I don't have time to sit there and watch a YouTube video of full podcast episodes. I tend to listen to
you and I
walking.
chatting.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think, depending on how people's lives are, what work they do, what tasks they have to do at home, often it'll be on the background. So, on stream on the TV or whatever. And even though they're not sitting there watching it like a movie, it does give you something. I started watching an episode of Stephen Bartlett's podcast, Diary of a CEO, and click play on Spotify, and it comes up now with the video. And even though I was listening
Spotify.
To it, I depending on where you're hosting it, and you can add the video on there now.
Wow.
And it's kind of hard to minimize Spotify and just listen to it, because you're kind of drawn to, especially because it's kind of quite an emotional episode, you're drawn to that connection, like you say.
I think that, again, go back to that thing of the arrogance of saying, well, you'll get it the way I want you to have it, instead of it's my gift to give it to you every which way. If I can get an hour, whatever it is, of a complete stranger, I owe them something in the sense of good content or interesting, or I'm taking over their one of their senses for an hour of time, and that's a big gift. It's a big gift that they're giving me. So I really appreciate it. And that's that gratitude thing. It all came to me, after 100 episodes or so, is, man, you're privileged. These people actually take time to have you with them during the day. And they've got no reason to, other than that they feel that you're giving them something.
Yeah. You really do have to take the time to think about it, because, you can put out 160 episodes and not have a single interaction with any of your listeners, but at the same time, you got hundreds or thousands of people sitting at home, and they've got this parasocial relationship with you, and you don't realize that actually they're thinking about your insights and what would Adrian think about this if he was talking about it on his podcast, and so on. And
That's a privilege, isn't it?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it can't be common for someone to recognize a podcaster from their voice as much as it is, someone on TV or something.
Yeah, it blew me away. It really
Yeah.
did. It really shocked me. And the other one will be when I, have a guest, and I will say to them, something like, oh, well, actually, I interviewed this guy, whoever, whatever, or woman, whoever it is. And they will say, oh, yeah. So my guest will say, oh, that episode just changed the way I thought about something. And I'm like, what? You've heard that? Before you even, came on, before you were ever a guest on my podcast. So that, yeah, again, I can, label tons of points that changed the way I've thought from having a podcast. In my business where we design, new homes, say, most of the time when we design a new home, it's on land that would be, I wouldn't say virgin land, but almost virgin land, if not virgin land. And we're going to change that piece of land forever. We're going to push it around. We're going to do something to it. And through my podcasting journey and talking to a few different people, I went, wow, what a responsibility. That land's got a deep history, and we're about to add something to it that even if it gets knocked down, it will have shifted it, and it will shift its energy and all the rest. So how can we be really respectful and honor that piece of land is my way of thinking.
Well, yeah, I mean, it has a kind of link to what we were saying about taking the time to think about the effect you're having on people that are listening.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, you could just as easily sort of, mow down some old building and
some virgin forest or something.
Yeah, and just throw up some flats and never think about it again. But you're taking the time to really think about how you're affecting people in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And more so ever than talking to other people that do what I do, and then other people who don't do what I do but have a different view of the world that wouldn't normally be in my circle. So, and ideally, like if I was the only person who ever heard my podcast, it would still do something for me. When it becomes all powerful is when I hear that it did something for somebody else. That's when you go, oh, okay. It's worthy of putting the effort and, doing the best job you can with it.
So going back to when you started the podcast.
Yep.
What were your reasons for starting it? So I know obviously you wanted to have those conversations, and it's become something where you hope you can affect other people's how they're thinking about things. But from a business perspective as well, what were your thoughts? Why did you decide to go with the podcast?
So there was a couple of drivers that happened early on. One was as I was aware of other people's podcasts, and not that I was a great listener, but I was aware, and I went, oh, well, they talk to some interesting people. And then I've always been a really big connector of people in my life. I like to say I trade people, and I don't really trade them, but what it is when I meet somebody, generally there's somebody in my life that's a parallel type of person that could be useful or interesting to that person. And so I will go, hey, I want to introduce you to so-and-so. I think that you guys could have a good conversation. You might learn something from each other. So I did it with two musical artists this week. Both of them live in proximity of, 25 minutes of each other. And both of them have recording contracts and stuff like that. And I went, do you know each other? And they went, no, we don't. And I said, you guys should. And then I'm bowing out at that point. You guys should. I think that would be valuable for you to know each other. And they've hooked up.
So you become kind of a connector.
Yeah, well, I've always been one, and this has allowed me to be even more so. And so, you said about a business sense. I started the podcast basically because, as I said, I'd been listening to others, and I went, oh, okay, this would be interesting. And then also I have this group of amazing people that I've met in my life, and I'm sure they've all got a good story to tell. And then I went, how do I elevate the conversations I have? So there's a thing that says, you'll be the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And so elevate the people you're around. And I went, how do I elevate the people I'm around? And what's in it for them to talk to me? And so I went, well, if I get a podcast going and I can turn it into a bunch of listeners, that's what's in it for them, is it sends their brand out wider, it sends their philosophies out wider. And that's what I'm kind of offering them as an opportunity to do that. And I knew that was really working when I got my probably about 10th approach from a PR company saying, would you interview this person who's in our PR? We do PR for them, and would you be happy to interview them? And some I say no to, but many I say yes to. And again, that's when I saw that I was actually bringing value to others, even more so than I imagined. So, yeah, and as a business sense, I haven't monetized my podcast particularly. I will, from my own point of view, in my business, in my design business, it adds a fair weight of credibility. And it also means that I can say to my prospective clients, I'll send them an episode and say, hey, I think this episode may resonate with you and where you're trying to go with your design. Or maybe it's something that's outside of their design. Maybe it's something about a personal thing that I know is on a particular podcast. And I go, you should go and listen to this one. If you've got time, do listen to it. I think there'd be some gems in there for you. And yeah, it's I think from that point, it's just another way of giving. And it does also lead to some other things. So like I'll do some speaking for conferences and stuff like that, usually on the designer, architect, builder relationship or one of those things. Then that's a profile builder more than anything. And I'll get asked to comment in magazines and asked to comment in, like articles and blogs and things like that, or on other people's podcasts as well. And so that, again, it builds credibility, or it destroys it, one or the other. Hopefully it builds it. No, it does build it. It's been fantastic. So from that point of view, I don't know that it's turning into $1 billion in the bank, and I don't think it ever will. And that isn't the purpose anyway. It kind of covers its costs at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of monetized in a way in that it's content marketing and PR to an extent, but it's obviously harder to measure than if you had an ad on there. But what were you thinking about any other kinds of monetization then?
No, we'll do some advertising, like sponsorship advertising on there. And I have been thinking of some other ones, which is, with some guests, making them a subscription guest so that people can subscribe and then they can get more than they would if they were just listening to the podcast. They can go into, and sort of like, again, this is putting something on my guest, which is, I've got to kind of work out how that sits, but a deeper not deeper, maybe a Q&A conversation that's really, I want to say, spicy, like it's asking very, in front of them questions. So my example would be, I'm not an investigative reporter or journalist. It is not my job to embarrass anybody, make them uncomfortable, or trap them in a corner. And it's my job that if somebody feels embarrassed, uncomfortable, or trapped in a corner, to rescue them and give them a safe space to be vulnerable and tell their story. And if you were going to go into into like a subscription part, so you might have the podcast that they can listen to, and then you might have another 30-minute piece or something where we're going to talk about specific functions of their business, or specific functions of what they do and how they drive part of their design process, or their client liaison process. So being very specific about their methodology. And they have to be very clear that we're going to monetize that piece as well, and that it's of value to our listeners. And in a sense, then we've got to be offering them something back from that. And ideally, it's not giving them the money, it's more giving them maybe some great marketing content, act more like a media company than a podcasting company.
Yeah, well, that sounds like it could work. And I mean, you do content on these shows as well. I don't know if there's any sponsorship opportunities with that.
There would be, without a doubt. And they would be, like if, say, for instance, if we had them loaded on YouTube, it would be, a subscription model to go and watch those pieces. And we might dig right into how somebody draws something, or what's their creative process when this happens, or how do you overcome, a homeowners association, or not overcome, how do you align them? How do you get these things to happen? So it would be really good specific content. Or if you're in the city of New York and you want to build a building, what are some of the parameters and stuff that you would be trying to work your way around? And who do you need in your camp to do that? What's your chances of success? When do you pull the plug on it, or when do you drive it forward? Those kinds of things. And I've certainly got people on the podcast who do that for a living. They do that all day long. I don't want to be necessarily selling people a course on that. I just want to be able to go, listen into this, and it will give you, the top 10 or the best 3 or whatever it is. Yeah. That would probably be the monetized point. So they've got that information coming.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of routes you could go down, really.
Fun, though.
Yeah. Couple more things before we wrap up. Just going into the more technical aspects of it, because I know this is something that a lot of podcasters struggle with the technical aspects and choosing the right platforms and things. You mentioned before that you were using Zencastr to record your episodes before.
Yeah, I started out with Zoom, and then went to Zencastr, and then went back to Zoom, essentially.
Yeah.
And my reasoning is I'm making it harder for my guest, and I haven't, all credit to Zencastr, a great platform. I don't know, because I haven't used it now for over a year. I don't know that it certainly didn't work on an iPad. It didn't work seamlessly on an iPhone. People had to download it if they were on, like a PC. And all of a sudden I was putting all these barriers of entry for my guest. And to me, it's an honor when I have a guest. So I'm asking something of them, and suddenly I'm putting all these barriers of entry or making it harder for them. And we would be getting online, and we would have 10 minutes of making sure technically we were okay before we could actually talk. And I'm like, that isn't how I want my guests to arrive online. I don't want them to be going, oh, is this working? Is that working? Oh, God, have I done this right? Haven't I done this right? Their anxiety levels come up. So much harder to have a great conversation with them if that's the case.
Yeah, because I'm interviewing podcasters anyway, generally they're going to have pretty good audio and know how to plug in the microphone and everything. And obviously it must be harder for you if you're speaking with someone who isn't in podcasting or in an audio field.
90% of the time I've got somebody, like, take for instance, so this video will go up as well.
Yeah.
That we're on.
Yeah.
So when Joe and I sat down originally, I was seated back about this far. I wasn't back here. I actually moved my camera forward, but I was back at this point for the size of our heads. So I moved mine forward so that I'd be about the same size head as Joe. And our lighting's a fairly good match. That's lucky. And in doing that, it's more engaging and easier for somebody to watch than me being way back there. Now, I'll get people where they're sitting at the other end of the table. Mm-hmm. They've got a camera at one end and they're down that end, and they've got a window behind them so you can't even see their face, you know. And I go, well, we won't be ever record it. We won't ever release that video, will we? And just things like that, just little things like that, I go, it's getting a balance of it. And then they'll be in a room and it's like, sounds like they're in a tin can or a drum or whatever, or they're recording on their iPhone, and it's sitting, in front of them somewhere on a stand, and the room's got the world's worst acoustics and stuff. And you just go, oh, really? But, like, it is what it is to some degree. I know I'm saying that to Joe, and Joe is like the consummate professional who goes, he would not sleep at night knowing that there was a sound variation like that. He would spend the next night fixing it. He'd be dragging every tool out of his shed to make that thing work perfectly. I'm a lazier person than Joe.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that.
Let's just say I'm not as talented as you, Joe. That's it. Yeah, I wouldn't know how.
I've tried to get better at it, to be honest, because it's not always ideal. Like the message is the most important thing, and sometimes you do just have to get it out there not if something's been recorded, like I've said something that I think I can say better, I'm not going to get in the habit of re-recording things, and because then it just gets obsessive and takes twice as long.
I did a session. I quite often, if I'm talking to somebody who's a creative and I know they play an instrument, or I see a guitar in the background or something like that, like I'd go, hey, Joe, can you pick up that guitar? Can you play me a song? And they'll go, yeah, I'd love to. And then I will get, 30 emails from after the podcast saying, I've replayed that song. Could you cut this in? Could you put this in? Because they're so nervous about their performance that they did on the first one. Because they're probably a better musician than they really think they are regardless, but they're like, it's just not comfortable sometimes, to be in that position. But they'll still do it when I ask them, and the first guy I ever asked was a guy called Jeffrey Dungan, and an architect out of Alabama. And I said to him, Jeffrey, there's a guitar in the background. And he's like, I said, do you play? And he's like, yeah, I do. I said, do you want to play something for us? And he's like, sure, like this. And he kind of leaned back. He's Southern, so he's got a real Southern accent. And he leaned back and he got the guitar, and then he got it up there. I can't remember what he played, but he played the guitar. And I remember I couldn't wipe the smile off my face for, I reckon, at least a week. Just seeing this other side of this absolutely brilliant architect picking away at a guitar and just heading off into his own utopia. Like, it was just, and so that got me started on going, oh, there's a lot of people who can play an instrument if they can play it proficiently enough and they're comfortable to. Why wouldn't we? It's fun.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that the only episode that I've edited where that's happened was for a design podcast. So it's obviously creatives more likely to have some instrument.
If I had a guitar in the background, you'd know it was a prop. because I certainly can't play a guitar. Something that I realized a little while ago, so this is an interesting tip for people who are podcasting, as I was listening to a book, and he was talking about your natural biorhythms and when you do what. So if you're a night owl, what time does your analytical brain and your creative brain work? And if you're a lark, so a morning person, what time does that work? And anyway, with that, I thought this was a pretty fascinating kind of, thing to map. Now, I do most of my podcasts between 5 a.m. and probably about 8 a.m. in the morning.
And that works best for you.
I'm in analytical. Everybody is analytical's their first part of their day. I generally podcast. A lot of my biggest audience is America, and I podcast with a lot of Americans. And the reason I do that is because I can start my day with a podcast, recording one, and I can be in analytics, which is good for me because I don't run away with the fairies too much. And then they are in their lull, or just so their downtime, when you get that sleepy bit about 1:30, 2 o'clock, maybe 2 till 3. They're in that, but that's actually a high creativity time. If you use your lull and put in creative stuff in that time, you will work really well creatively. And this is just something that happens for just about all humans. So I'm talking, and I realized this a little while back. I'm going to look I'm pretty sure the book is When by Daniel H. Pink. I should check that, but I'm pretty sure it is. And with that, I realized that I am using my best time of being able to stay on track, and because I'm a bit ADHD, and they are using their best time because they've got a chance to be creative in their conversation. And so the reason I do my podcast early is so I can get on and do a day's work. And the reason I don't have lots of Australians or New Zealanders on my podcast is because none of them want to record. I shouldn't say none. Most of them don't want to record at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
Or 5 a.m.
Yeah, I'll have a look for that book. That's interesting. Because I've called you up at 10 at night for this interview.
No,
so what mode are you in?
No, 6 o'clock at night.
Oh.
Yeah. Depends what part of Australia.
Time zones. Okay. Yeah. That's not too bad then.
I'm in Queensland. No, it's not bad at all.
Don't feel so bad now, but
yeah. If we'd done it in my morning, it would have been you at 10 at night.
Yeah.
Instead of your morning.
Well, this has been really interesting, and I really appreciate you talking about your podcast and we went to places where I didn't think we'd go. So I'm really pleased we got to chat again.
Yeah, likewise, Joe. I've really enjoyed it. But I think that's because I've done most of the talking.
No, that's why I've enjoyed it as well. So for any designers or creatives who want to hear more, obviously you can search Talk Design on all major, I'm presuming it's on all major podcast platforms, Spotify.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Great.
It's on everything, and we use Acast as our distributor.
Okay. Yeah, so I'd highly recommend that, because just have a look through the episodes, because there's sort of something for everyone if you're a creative.
I think, look, again, I like to just vary it enough. So if you go, I don't want to hear an architect, or I don't want to hear an interior designer, there might be a couple of clothing designers on there that are listening to, and then there'll definitely be a few business coaches and marketing coaches and people like that. Another strategy for podcasters, and you'll see a few on mine, is talking to other podcasters. And it's partly a growth strategy, but we all have something in common because we all go through the same pain points to do what we're doing. And I find that really interesting as well, is to talk to them about what they come across and how they better solve their problems.
Yeah, well, like speaking podcasts speaking to podcasts and creatives speaking to creatives as well, even if they're not in your field.
In the field,
it's still getting people's ideas and mentalities and how they're able to be creative and
absolutely
still beneficial.
Yeah.
Cool.
100%.
Well, thank you again, and I'll speak to you again, I'm sure.
You will, Joe. Thank you so much, and really, really appreciate you having me on here and the work that you've done for me as well. It's been brilliant.
I appreciate you coming on. Thanks, Adrian.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.